I was 21 when it happened, during the summer between my junior and senior years of college. I had taken a job as a house sitter for a family in a small, rural town in upstate New York. The Morrisons were a friendly couple in their late 40s with two young kids. They were heading to Europe for 3 weeks, and all they wanted was someone to keep an eye on their house and take care of their dog, Daisy. It sounded like an easy gig. A big, beautiful house on the edge of a forest, a pool in the backyard, and all the peace and quiet I could want. They even offered to stock the fridge with groceries. For a broke college student looking for some solitude, it was perfect. Or so I thought. The first week passed without incident. Daisy was a sweet golden retriever who followed me everywhere, and I spent most of my time lounging by the pool, reading books, and catching up on Netflix. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and knew each other by name. It felt safe. But by the second week, that sense of safety started to erode. It began on a Tuesday night. I was sitting in the living room, scrolling through my phone with Daisy curled up at my feet. The TV was on low, playing some reality show I wasn't paying attention to. The Morrisons had one of those old-fashioned landlines, and when it started to ring, I almost didn't know what to do. Nobody ever called the house phone. Mr. Morrison had told me to ignore it unless the caller ID showed his number. But this call had no ID at all, just the word unknown. I let it ring. Eventually, it stopped. I didn't think much of it until it rang again about 15 minutes later. Again, unknown. This time, I felt a flicker of unease. Who even used landlines anymore, let alone called them twice in a row without leaving a message? I muted the TV, listening as the ringing stopped once more. Daisy perked up, her ears twitching. She let out a low, uneasy whine. Just a weird call, I told her, though I wasn't entirely convincing myself. An hour later, it rang again. Same unknown number. This time, curiosity got the better of me. I picked up the receiver and hesitated, my finger hovering over the button to answer. I could feel my heartbeat quicken as I finally pressed it and brought the phone to my ear. "Hello?" I said. Silence. "Hello?" I repeated, louder this time. Nothing. But there was something off. I could hear faint static, like the sound of a bad connection. And beneath that, just barely audible, was what sounded like breathing. Slow, deliberate, and rhythmic. I hung up and stared at the phone, my skin crawling. It had to be a prank, I told myself. Some bored teenager messing around. But why did it feel so personal? I tried to shake it off and went to bed, leaving a single light on in the hallway. Daisy slept at the foot of my bed, her warm presence reassuring me. But even with her there, I had trouble sleeping. Every noise in the house, every creak and groan of the old wooden floor, felt amplified. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of Daisy growling softly. My heart sank as I sat up and saw her standing by the bedroom door, her ears pinned back and her tail stiff. She was staring at the door, her growl growing louder. "What is it, girl?" I whispered, my voice trembling. I grabbed my phone and tiptoed to the door, pressing my ear against it. I couldn't hear anything at first, but just as I was about to dismiss it, there it was, a faint shuffling sound, like footsteps on carpet. Someone was in the house. I froze, my mind racing. The Morrisons had an alarm system, and I had armed it before bed. There was no way someone could have gotten in without triggering it. But Daisy's reaction and the sound outside the door told a different story. I reached for the baseball bat I'd seen propped up in the corner of the bedroom earlier that week, clutching it tightly as I dialed 911. The operator's voice was calm, but mine wasn't. I whispered into the phone, explaining what was happening, and she assured me officers were on their way. As I waited, I heard it again, the shuffling, closer this time. And then, the faint sound of breathing, just like on the phone. Slow, deliberate, and terrifyingly close. Daisy barked, a sharp, aggressive sound that made the hair on my neck stand on end. The breathing stopped. I stayed there, paralyzed, clutching the bat and waiting for what felt like an eternity until I finally heard the distant sound of sirens. The footsteps retreated, moving quickly down the hall. Moments later, the police arrived, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they swept the house. They found no one. The officers checked all the doors and windows, but nothing had been forced open. The alarm system was still armed, and everything seemed untouched. They assured me they'd patrol the area and suggested I stay somewhere else for the night, but I couldn't leave Daisy behind. I locked myself in the bedroom and kept the bat by my side, though I didn't sleep. The next day, I found something that made my blood run cold. The Morrisons had a small guest room on the first floor that they used for storage. I rarely went in there, but as I was doing a cautious sweep of the house, I noticed the closet door was slightly ajar. Inside, beneath a pile of old blankets, I found a small cassette recorder. It was still running, the tape spinning slowly. My hands shook as I pressed stop and ejected the tape. I didn't have a cassette player to listen to it, but I didn't need to. Written in black marker on the tape's label was a single word: listen. I called the police again and showed them what I'd found. They took the recorder and the tape as evidence, but they couldn't explain how it had gotten there. The closet hadn't been checked during the initial sweep, and the officer I spoke to assured me they'd keep investigating. The Morrisons returned a few days later. I told them everything, though I left out some of the more terrifying details. I didn't want to scare their kids. They seemed shocked but not entirely surprised. Mrs. Morrison confessed that she had always felt uneasy in the house, as if she was being watched. I never found out who left the tape or why they had been in the house that night. The police never followed up, and the Morrisons didn't press the issue. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I think about that breathing, and I wonder if it was ever really just a prank. It happened the summer I turned 19. I had just moved out of my parents' house to live on my own for the first time. It wasn't anything fancy. A small one-bedroom apartment on the third floor of a run-down building in a quiet part of town. It wasn't the best neighborhood, but it was what I could afford. The rent was cheap, the landlord was hands-off, and for the most part, I felt safe there. I was finishing my first semester of community college and working late shifts at a diner nearby. That summer, I picked up extra hours to help with bills, which meant I often got home around 1 a.m. The streets were usually empty at that hour, with only the occasional hum of a passing car or the distant bark of a dog breaking the silence. One Friday night in July, I got back to my apartment after an exhausting shift. I dropped my bag by the door and kicked off my shoes, too tired to care that they landed in the middle of the floor. The apartment was suffocatingly warm despite the ceiling fan spinning lazily above me. I remember glancing at the thermostat and cursing under my breath. It was 84 degrees inside. I walked to the living room, opened the sliding glass door to my small balcony, and pulled the thin curtain to the side. The apartment complex backed up to a patch of woods, and a faint breeze was blowing in, carrying the earthy scent of trees and damp soil. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I grabbed a glass of water from the kitchen and collapsed onto the couch. The quiet was soothing, but there was something about that silence that always felt heavier at night. I turned on the TV, mostly for background noise, and let some random late-night infomercial play as I scrolled through my phone. That's when I first noticed it, movement, out of the corner of my eye. I looked up, my heart skipping a beat, but there was nothing there. Just the dark outline of the woods beyond my balcony. I shook my head and laughed softly to myself. "You're just tired," I muttered, leaning back into the couch. But I couldn't shake the unease. My eyes kept drifting toward the balcony, half expecting to see something, or someone, lurking in the shadows. I decided to close the curtain, hoping it would calm my nerves. As I stood up, I froze. There, in the faint reflection of the glass door, I saw it. A shadow. It wasn't mine. Someone, or something, was standing just beyond the edge of the balcony, partially hidden by the overgrown ivy that clung to the railing. My breath caught in my throat. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, barely visible in the dim light from the parking lot below. I thought about calling out, demanding to know who it was. But fear rooted me in place. What if they answered? What if they stepped into the light? Instead, I backed away, keeping my eyes on the shadow. My mind raced. Was it a neighbor? A prank? Or was it something worse? I grabbed my phone and darted into the bedroom, locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to dial 911. The dispatcher's calm voice was a stark contrast to my panicked whispers as I explained what was happening. She assured me officers were on the way and told me to stay on the line. As I sat on the floor, pressed against the far wall, I heard it. A faint creak, The sound of the sliding glass door opening. My blood ran cold. I wanted to believe I had imagined it, but the soft, almost imperceptible rustling of the curtain confirmed my worst fear. Whoever had been outside was now inside. I held my breath, trying to stay as silent as possible. Every noise seemed magnified. The hum of the fridge, the faint whir of the fan, the pounding of my own heartbeat. I prayed that the locked bedroom door would be enough to keep them out. And then, the footsteps started. Slow, deliberate, heavy against the creaky wooden floor. They moved through the living room, pausing occasionally, as if the intruder was listening. I gripped my phone tighter, pressing it to my ear as the dispatcher urged me to stay calm. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just outside my bedroom door. I stared at the doorknob, half expecting it to start turning, but instead, there was silence. The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. I thought maybe they had left, but then I heard a sound that chilled me to the bone. Breathing. Deep, ragged breaths, coming from the other side of the door. They were so close I could almost feel them. I wanted to scream, to cry, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed with fear, my entire body trembling as I stared at the door, waiting for it to burst open. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the breathing stopped. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, though it was probably only a few minutes. I stayed frozen, my phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dispatcher reassure me that help was almost there. Finally, I heard the faint wail of sirens in the distance. The sound grew louder, closer, until flashing red and blue lights illuminated my apartment. The footsteps retreated, moving quickly toward the balcony. I heard the sliding door again, followed by the faint rustle of leaves as whoever it was disappeared into the woods. The police arrived moments later, banging on my front door. I unlocked it, tears streaming down my face as I tried to explain what had happened. They searched the apartment and the surrounding area but found no sign of the intruder. The officer in charge asked if anything was missing, but as far as I could tell, nothing had been taken. It was almost as if whoever had been there wasn't interested in stealing. They just wanted to be inside. The police left after securing the sliding door and promising to patrol the area for the next few nights. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every creak and groan of the building sent me into a fresh wave of panic. A week later, I decided to move out. I couldn't stay there, not after what had happened. But even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that it wasn't just some random break-in. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear those slow, deliberate footsteps in my mind. And I wonder if, somewhere out there, they're still watching. I was 28, living in a quiet suburban neighborhood in northern Illinois. My house was a cozy one-story place with a partially finished basement. I lived alone, aside from my dog, Max, a golden retriever who was more of a companion than a guard dog. He was lovable, but let's be honest. If someone broke in, Max would probably wag his tail and ask for pets. It was a Tuesday night, early autumn, with a chill creeping into the air. I'd been binging a true crime series on Netflix, the kind that makes you double-check your locks and question every creak in your house. Max was sprawled out on the couch next to me, snoring softly. The house was quiet, eerily so, the kind of silence where even the hum of the fridge seemed too loud. I paused the show to grab a drink from the kitchen. As I walked back to the couch, I heard it for the first time. A faint whisper. It came from below. At first, I brushed it off. It's an old house, I thought. Old houses creak, settle, and make strange noises. I told myself the sound was probably just the wind finding its way through some crack in the foundation. I sat back down and pressed play. But then, it came again, clearer this time. A whisper, unmistakable. It was faint, but I could swear it was a voice. My heart started to race. I muted the TV, holding my breath as I strained to listen. Silence. I shook my head, forcing a laugh. It's nothing, I said out loud, more to myself than Max. But even Max had perked up, his ears twitching as he stared at the basement door. His usual wagging tail was now still. I decided to check it out. Grabbing my phone, I turned on the flashlight. The light bounced off the dark, wood-paneled walls as I descended the basement stairs. Halfway down, I stopped. The air felt heavier. like something was watching me. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. Nothing, just the faint hum of the furnace. I scanned the basement, sweeping the flashlight beam across the cluttered space. Boxes, old furniture, and some tools lined the walls. Nothing seemed out of place. I felt foolish. "See, Max?" I said, mostly to calm myself. "Just the house playing tricks." I turned to go back upstairs, but as I reached the top step, I heard it again. A whisper, this time louder and clearer. It said my name. Eli. My blood ran cold. My grip on the doorknob tightened, and I slammed the basement door shut behind me. I locked it. My heart was pounding in my chest as I backed away from the door. Max was growling now, low and guttural, something I'd never heard from him before. His eyes were fixed on the basement door, hackles raised. I decided I wasn't staying in that house alone for the night. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, but as I reached the entryway, I heard something that stopped me in my tracks. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and coming up the basement stairs. I froze, debating whether to run out the door or grab something to defend myself. Adrenaline took over, and I grabbed a heavy cast iron pan from the kitchen. Max barked furiously, his tail stiff as he stood between me and the basement door. The footsteps stopped. I waited, every muscle in my body tense. The house fell silent again. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. And then, the basement door handle started to turn. I screamed, raising the pan like a weapon. "I'm calling the cops." I yelled, my voice cracking. The handle stopped moving. I backed away, fumbling for my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. When the dispatcher answered, I stammered something about someone being in my basement. She assured me officers were on the way. The wait felt like an eternity. I stayed near the front door, pan in one hand, phone in the other. Max barked non-stop, his growls echoing through the small house. Finally, red and blue lights flashed outside. 2 officers knocked on the door, and I let them in, relief washing over me. I explained what had happened, pointing to the basement door. One officer stayed with me while the other went downstairs to check it out. He was gone for several minutes. When he came back up, his expression was grim. "There's no one down there," he said. But what?" I pressed. He hesitated, glancing at his partner. "We found something unusual. Looks like someone's been staying down there." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" He motioned for me to follow him. Reluctantly, I did. In the far corner of the basement, behind a stack of old boxes, was a makeshift bedding area. An old sleeping bag, some empty food wrappers, and even a notebook. The officer picked it up and handed it to me. The first page had just one word scrawled over and over. Eli. I felt sick. The officers stayed with me while I packed a bag. I went to stay with a friend that night, unable to be in that house another second. When I returned the next day with a locksmith, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was still watching me. I sold the house 6 months later. To this day, I don't know who or what was in my basement that night. But sometimes, when I'm alone, I still hear faint whispers, and I wonder if I truly ever left it behind.